Welcome to the Generalist, where security practitioners come to look beyond niches, silos, egos, and expand their professional comfort zones. My name is Ilya Umanskiy. This is episode 4, and the title I chose for this episode may be self-explanatory to many. It's called The Chip on My Shoulder. So let me start off by saying to you that it's difficult for me to consider myself a professional, especially in the world where I offer advice to the likes of lawyers, architects, engineers, and doctors. And I'll explain as I go through this episode why that's the case, but I hope you're starting to get the point of this whole undertaking. I believe that today we're still a trade, and I've heard this mentioned a few times by a few practitioners in our industry. And that's very sad. And it's creating an infinitely harder path for even someone like myself with 20 years of experience in security. I also see that the same lack of assurance, lack of career progression is making a lot of younger aspiring practitioners in our industry who are looking at security and are thinking about a career in this field to question whether they should go elsewhere. Or for some of those young practitioners that have entered our field and become very quickly disillusioned by lack of standards, lack of career progression that is much more visible, much more understandable, and attainable. So let's talk about how talent enters our industry. It's not a secret to you that first and foremost, a lot of people come here by accident. That's how I came to this industry. That's how I've seen a lot of my friends come to this industry. It's not like they understood very well what they're getting into. And I've seen people from law enforcement and military come to this industry not having a good understanding of what they would need to be doing in this industry, what kind of skills they would need to bring to it. And so the accident is an interesting issue because if you want to call yourself a professional, but you got into this industry by accident, how can you justify what you're learning and what you have learned to substantiate what advice you're able to offer? The next big channel for talent into our industry is from military and law enforcement. Great many skill sets, needless to say. A lot of very eager, especially younger practitioners that come from those two career paths. And I see that organizations in the private sector are reacting to this experience, this background in military and law enforcement as something that's very, very favorable for someone that the private sector organization considers to be a security practitioner. And yet we're seeing a lot of discussions in our industry where even practitioners who have come to security from military and law enforcement having to write books to say, you're not understanding the difficulty of transition, or speaking at conferences and sharing with the audience and saying that, no, you really need to learn so much more. You can't assume that the baggage you're bringing from your past career is enough to carry you to success in the career in the private sector, in the security field. And I see examples of this left and right, working as a consultant and having to take former cops and infantrymen or someone from other branches of the military, very studiously trying to take notes as I walk with them throughout the facility and giving me puzzled looks when I ask them about technical features of their security, when I talk about operations, when I ask them about physical security, when I talk to them about information protection, and not being able to give me a cohesive answer about why they're choosing certain methods of protection or why certain methods are completely absent. And this happens, or has been happening, particularly in my experience, for a long, long time. I'm not saying that everyone who's transitioned either by accident or from military and law enforcement doesn't know what they're doing. No, there are actually a great many examples of people who have transitioned well, and they've actually been humble and studied the field and tried to really expand their knowledge base. But we all know that if we look at the current CSOs and if we look at the current senior managers in our industry, particularly those that are in-house, they have still a lot to learn. The question is whether they do learn. And that's something that I don't necessarily see, at least in a consistent manner. Because I see that organizations still deploy fairly poor controls, fairly disjointed controls, and controls that have no basis in risk management or mission critical asset classification. I've said my piece about this many times. Please feel free to look at my other episodes where I talked about what risk management should be and what mission critical assets are, or how can they be defined. So let's move on. The next channel for talent coming to our industry is from IT, engineering, and some other trades. So somebody has been an electrician, but they've gotten experience installing security systems, and they've transitioned and they've been an installer or a manager of installation or an operations manager for an integrator for a long time. Or the same applies to people who have been, let's say, a system administrator, and they've started picking up skills, got a CISSP certification, and then started working in security. Now, there's also this cadre of people who learned security, particularly data protection, as being hackers at a very young age, and then progressing, basically doing some gray stuff, if you will, but then acquiescing and turning themselves to become protectors, at least in the digital domain. All that's well and good. However, those folks are entering our industry having a very narrow understanding of how to protect and what needs to be protected. For example, if I were to ask a person at an integrator, right, how do you achieve blast protection? It's very unlikely that they'd be able to give me an answer. Or if I were to ask a person who does data protection, what domains does information exist in? So very easily, I can explain to a lot of folks that information does not just exist in the digital domain. It's not just exclusive to ones and zeros. For example, I'm talking to you now, and I'm sharing with you information verbally, right? So some of that information may not exist in any other domain until I have uttered words at a conference, for example, like a CEO of Sony did when he announced very prematurely that their new chip was going into iPhones. No such information was available to unauthorized individuals until the CEO actually said something. Didn't write an email, he didn't record a video file or use any other digital tools. He simply went on stage and compromised security of the information that he was supposed to protect. So information does not exist just in digital domain. And I would argue that it's incorrect to associate, when people say information security, with just ones and zeros. And so my contention for those who are entering our industry from IT, engineering, and other trades is that they automatically become very narrow operators, not understanding how to protect with a very wide tool belt. And I've talked about the tool belt. You can go back to one of my previous episodes. So the other two categories of how people enter our industry, one is from guarding companies. So someone becomes a young or not so young security officer, and through their sheer ability, working first on the front line, then growing and becoming a supervisor, then becoming a branch manager of sorts, and then going into senior management in those organizations, they are able to work within our industry. Once again, a bit of a narrow approach because you're primarily managing human capital, you're working on the front lines, and primarily it's more physical contact with individuals, operating some technologies. So gaining some understanding, but that lacks strategy. So the last, but not least group that comes to our industry are college graduates. A lot of them recently are coming into the field of threat intelligence. And what concerns me there is that nobody helps that college graduate, which I can tell you, I've been myself, and I've been plucked out of John Jay College of Criminal Justice as a upcoming college graduate to work in the Global Security Department. And so those college graduates are not really given a fuller spectrum of responsibility. They are not taught how to think of security more strategically, and they begin to enter the industry once again into a very narrow path. For example, it's not enough to earn the right to call yourself a security practitioner if you're simply doing threat intel. Okay, you got to do something with the results of that intel, and that means developing additional controls. If you simply know how to look for information, how to analyze it, and how to present some of that analysis to senior management, to what degree are you able to participate in further protection measures? And so you're also not learning, obviously, things like security technology. You're not, unless you're doing it all by yourself, which is something that I will talk to you in a second. So we have these channels that are sending talent into our industry, but all of that is very haphazard. I see that people are looking left and right for resources, and sometimes either hold on for dear life to what they already know, but that's very narrow, and they're not willing to entertain an idea of learning more. Or they feel like they've learned enough, now is the time for them to expend their advice onto others. And that becomes very dangerous, because if an integrator comes to me and all they can talk about is how I need to saturate my facility with technology, right? Do you think that's headed in the right direction? The same goes for those who say we need to protect the organization by looking at its data protection, data security, which is, again, it's a subset of protection, I grant that, but it's not protection as a whole. So the chip on my shoulder has been this issue of constantly looking for the opportunities to move on, to help both the industry do better, to be better organized, to get past just the certifications that we get, the PSPs and CPPs and whatever else you have, which are bestowed upon someone once in their life, and then they have to go to lunches, dinners, and breakfasts to get their points, or occasional training seminars, which are not frequent enough to solidify knowledge that they attain there. Therefore, if I were to challenge somebody with the same test material that they have passed, let's say, applying for the CPP certification, let's say I take a year to wait and then test them again, without advanced prep, would they know the answers again? So the same goes for CISSPs and everybody else. So our industry has been, unfortunately, stuck believing that associations is all we need, and these once-in-a-lifetime certifications is all that's going to help us become professionals. I can submit to you that's not the case. The reason why that's not the case, because we see incidents that are either identical or similar, that are recurring in organizations that should know better by now. And unfortunately, we don't see much progression to continual learning, to metrics that help measure how someone has been not only understanding and attaining that knowledge, but also applying that knowledge. Wouldn't it be great if we could measure someone who got their CPP certification on the basis of how well they do their job in the course of the following year, and then assess what kind of advice they've produced, what kind of measures they offer to the organization, and then see whether they have aligned themselves with the curriculum that they have learned, the material they've learned, and on the basis of which they got their certification in the first place. So that's been a big concern of mine. So I'm not a big believer in certifications, although I have had one. And I've held on to it for a long time. And every year that I had it and I got recertified time and time again, it was difficult for me to apply for that certifications, not because I didn't have enough points, but because I knew very well how I got them. And I got them. Some of it was self-education, completely on my own volition. And some of it was writing, some of it was sharing information with others. By the way, I was submitting those points and people were not even checking the quality of my work. Okay? The same goes for additional points that I had gotten, let's say within a certification period. They have to go to lunches and dinners and breakfasts just to shake hands, if you will, with people and schmooze with them, and you still get your recertification points. Okay, so that's a big concern of mine. I'm not surprised why, if you talk to a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, or an architect, and you explain to them how we get our certifications and how we get our professional designations, why they might laugh us out of the house. The same goes for the C-suite. So the status quo needs to change. Because at the end of the day, as I said to you, it's hurting our talent, it's hurting our access to the C-suite, it's hurting our ability to be respected and recognized properly for our prudent knowledge by the actual professions and by those who have gotten their MBAs and now manage big organizations and have to every day deal with risks. So my call to action is to do the following, or at least please consider the following. Let's look at other professions. I mean, seriously. Let's take a look at what architects do in order to get their education, what kind of capabilities exist in the academic sphere for such a profession, architecture, engineering, and so on. It's no joke. If you want to become an architect, you have to jump through a lot of hoops, but the difference is at least the person who wants to become an architect knows the pathway. They understand how to get from knowing nothing to becoming a registered architect. So same goes for engineers, same goes for lawyers, same goes for doctors. We also owe it to ourselves to agree on what our academic standards should be, because we could be looking at other professions, but if we don't agree with what our academic standards should be, we can't even start. Nor can we comfortably say and point to academic institutions who would be willing to take those academic standards and build comprehensive programs for educating at a bachelor level and at the master's degree level, potentially then transitioning into postgraduate degrees, including PhDs. I also hope that we could start considering licensing. Why? Because I've seen an incident where a practitioner in our industry in New York City has been implicated and proven to be engaging in illegal activity, meaning inappropriate relationships and theft of companies' assets, only to appear at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for ASIS in the following month. That person, mind you, was led out of the building in handcuffs just a month before they showed up at the NASA's show. Okay? So I could use licensing and reporting mechanisms that are related to licensing to strip people that have no integrity of their ability to practice within our industry. I think we deserve nothing less. The same goes if you compare to, for example, a niche of investigators. There are licensed investigators. That's for a reason, because they have to work on very serious cases and in many ways support litigation, support government efforts, and God forbid, they don't know what they're doing. They could be stripped of their license, particularly if it comes to issues of integrity. Last but not least, what I feel is needed in our industry is parting with our ego. I think many of you who are listening to what I'm telling you now will take a step back and say, who the hell is he to tell me what I do and do not know, or whether I am a professional or I'm not a professional? And if that's the first thought that crosses your mind, that means that I'm not the only one with the chip on my shoulder. That means that you don't assume positive intent and don't know how to do it. And I welcome for you to think twice about your first reaction to such a video. I welcome for you to, or for your own benefit, or for the benefit of the young and aspiring professionals, hopefully professionals in our industry, who will be replacing us, to think for them, what would you like to leave them with so that they could be recognized for their professionalism? They could have a solid platform for development. They could look back and say, not only do I want to make money, but I also want to be treated with respect and understanding of my efforts, recognition of what I contribute to an organization and to my community. And someone, hopefully, who has a license to practice what they do in the industry, and when they're not able to perform to the standard, that they would be under review for performing below expectations, and to help keep our industry above board everywhere we dispense our advice. So, thank you for your time. Thank you for treating this message with positive intent, positive attention. I always welcome for you to challenge me. I always welcome any ideas for alternative solutions, alternative methods of improving our industry. But if we don't standardize, if we don't move beyond our industry certifications and create real academic background and a solid foundation for a young aspiring practitioner to join our industry in the near future, we have not done justice and done good work for the incoming younger generation. I leave you with that. Thank you.